So for tonight, Professor Dennis Doyle earned his BA from Colorado State University, his MA in American History from American Public University, and an MA in Sociology from DePaul University. Since 1999, he has taught history and sociology at Joliet Junior College in Joliet, Illinois. Best of all, Professor Doyle is the current president of the Chicago Civil War Roundtable, which is the very first Civil War Roundtable founded in 1940?
1940, December 3rd.
See? So we have big footsteps to follow in, and he's going to be sharing with us tonight about Illinois Regiments at Gettysburg. So thank you.
All right. Well, it's definitely great to be here. I left Chicago with 75, and I landed in California, and it was like 68. So you have a lot of catching up to do with weather in California. I do want to say it's a great honor to be here. Thank you again, Janet, for inviting me. I did give this presentation last November to the Inland Empire Roundtable, and boy, I think they're going to be the top meeting at the Lincoln Shrine. This is really, really beautiful place, and actually a Chicagoan. Obviously, this house is from a Chicagoan too. Of course, you have the prairie style kind of home that this is modeled after. So it's nice as a lifelong Chicagoan to be here. It's always an honor for me to talk about where I'm from, especially when it's outside of the Midwest. I gave this presentation in October 2023 in Gettysburg to the Gettysburg Roundtable on Illinois Regiments at Gettysburg, and right across the street was the 82nd Illinois Monument. Let me tell you something, I felt very proud about that, and so I thank you for inviting me to come and talk about my folks, the Illinois veterans who fought in the Civil War. I always start with Lincoln, okay? Lincoln, obviously the land of Lincoln. He's from Kentucky and lived in Indiana for a while. We're very proud of Lincoln. We, I think, do a fairly good job of K through 12 schools talking about Lincoln and the importance of Lincoln. And a lot of my college students have an interest in Lincoln in my history classes that I teach. I do teach a Civil War class each semester, and of course my early American history class and all that kind of thing. So Lincoln, he is the main reason and the underlying reason for this talk for today. But again, there's a lot of people I'm going to introduce you to tonight who you've heard of, that maybe I can give you a little bit more information about the folks that you've heard of. Obviously, it's July 1863, and Lee has his victory at Chancellorsville, right? Lee is at the top of his power. Obviously, we mentioned earlier Stonewall Jackson. He dies through friendly fire. Lee reshuffles his command structure, but Lee is at the height of his power. He's also, remember Clausewitz, right? All politics, right? War is politics by other means, okay? Lee knows that. Lee knows that. War is politics by other means. And so, what does Lee have to do? He's got to go on the offensive. He's got to bring the war not only to the Army of Potomac, he's got to bring that war to a free state, Pennsylvania. Okay? When we look at the archaeological records, the historical records, okay, of the Union soldiers, Federal soldiers, and we look at all those transcripts, we look at all their letters they wrote to their sweethearts back home, what's the one thing that really motivated them? Lee was in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is free soil. This is not Maryland. We talked about Maryland earlier. This is not Maryland. This is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a free state. How dare Lee bring this army of his to a free state? Right? General Reynolds had no business being where he was when he was shot and killed on the morning of July 1st. No business being where he's at. Where's he from? He's from Lancaster. Right? I mean, my God, right here, he's got the Iron Brigade. They don't need to be told by their general where to place their soldiers. Okay? So keep that in mind. Lee is motivated by politics. Yes, he wants to get a victory. He also wants to get that victory in his free state, Pennsylvania. But one thing we don't talk enough about is the reaction by the federal troops in Pennsylvania. And you're going to see that in these Illinois troops too. Because a lot of them were abolitionists. The 8th Illinois Cavalry was made up of abolitionists. The 82nd Illinois from Chicago, primarily German immigrants, they called themselves Lincoln's Volunteers. Okay? These are all volunteers, by the way. So Lee has a masterful plan. Masterful. Okay? He's going to take that army out of Virginia, through Maryland, into Pennsylvania. He had not done that before, getting to a free state like that. And he's going to pay the price. Because war is about killing. Right? I used to ask my dad, Dad, what was it like when you were in the military? He always would say, Denny, I survived. When I was a kid, we'd always go to the local VFW hall in Joliet, Illinois. A guy named Frank Mercanti was a member. He later made very famous in the Band of Brothers, Frank Mercanti. Okay? Lived a long time. And he lived his whole life in Joliet, where I'm from, just it's a south suburb of Chicago. So, who really is the one that dictates the battle at Gettysburg? It's this guy, John Buford. Right? Is there any person in the Civil War as a general who is the epitome of what a general should be? It's John Buford. I think we'd all agree with that. He's in his late 30s. He's a graduate of West Point. He's out west. He's a brilliant cavalry officer. He's a no-nonsense guy. But he cares about his soldiers. Okay? I love this monument at Gettysburg. He's facing west, looking for the enemy. Right? Where's the enemy? Because what's Buford going to do? He's an experienced cavalry officer. He's going to give orders that people are going to follow. And when they follow those orders, what are those orders going to do? They're going to be to kill another human being. He accepts that. He accepts that. War is killing. He's not a volunteer. He's a West Point grad. He served out west. He was at Blue Water Creek in Nebraska in 1854. Okay? He's a professional soldier. He's the one who chose Gettysburg. More than any other person. More than any other person. As a matter of fact, Lee was trying to concentrate in a town west of Gettysburg called Cashtown. Okay? Originally. I always have to put this in there. He was born in Kentucky but raised in Rock Island, Illinois. Okay, I got to put that in there for a home team. His father was a politician. His father was a career politician. He was in Illinois state legislation. He was a very political guy. So Buford grew up in a political home. Okay, obviously his Kentucky roots are very political as well. He's got family all throughout Kentucky, of course. But he grew up in a political family, so Buford understood politicians. His father was a career politician. Right? He graduated class in 1848. So he's 15 years out of graduation. What does he do in that 15 years? He spends it in the Army. Okay? Again, he's at Blue Water Creek in Nebraska. That's a very interesting place. It's actually not that. It's not very hard to get to off of I-80. It's like south central Nebraska. He also serves with Henry Heath. Who does he meet in the morning of July 1st? Henry Heath. Yeah, he served with Henry Heath. Also with General Warren. I love this. 1861, he's going back to Washington, D.C. to get his orders from the West, from Utah. He goes through Kentucky. I got a letter from the governor of Kentucky, his direct quote. He sent word to come to Kentucky at once, and I shall have anything I want. That governor of Kentucky later becomes a general in the Confederate Army. Okay? What is his answer? What does Buford say? I was a captain in the United States Army, and I intend to remain one. Right? Anything wishy-washy about that? I intend to remain one. And if you put a uniform on, Mr. Governor, I might just be the guy who shoots you. Right? Can you imagine, you just see Buford, right? Of course, it doesn't hurt that a great actor played him in Gettysburg movie, okay, let's be honest. On the night of June 30th, by the way, the 8th Illinois was the first Union troops, federal troops to enter Gettysburg, I have to throw that out there, on the night of June 30th, or the day, afternoon of June 30th. Thomas Devens, a New Yorker of Irish descent. Of course, he comes up to kind of like a Sherman-esque at Shiloh kind of moment, isn't it? Hey, we're used to running, right? We've been doing a lot of running, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, right? You know, what do you think, General Buford? You know, I don't know. You know, what are we going to do? This is kind of sketchy. What does Buford say to him? You know, Thomas, we have good ground and we can anything the enemy could send us. Okay? You know, Devens was from New York, right? He was in the militia. He's an experienced guy. I love what General Buford said back. He goes, no, that famous line, the devil's to pay, right? The devil's to pay, as they will attack you in the morning and they will come booming, skirmishers 3 deep. You will have to fight like the devil to hold your own. The enemy knows the importance of this ground and will strain every nerve to secure it. And if we are able to hold it, we will do so. I'm not going anywhere. What are my orders? We're going to stand and fight. Any other questions? He throws out. Your fault, my fault, no one's fault. I'm not going anywhere. He's got 2,700 troops. And we know about cavalry, what? Every fourth man does what? Holds a horse. That'd be my job, by the way. I would be there, but I would hold it. I need volunteers. Yep, I can hold those horses, sir. About 20 miles back, I can take them and feed them too if you want me to. I'll bring them some ammunition, whatever you need.
You gonna brush them?
What's that?
You gonna brush them?
Yeah, hey. Whatever General orders me to do. I would have been in uniform, I don't know. Look at that. I mean, he just is the epitome of a soldier. He's got that command presence. You know, it's funny, my wife, who's a math professor, knows nothing about Civil War history except what she hears off the walls when I talk about it. The first time I showed her this presentation years ago, this picture years ago, she goes, ooh, wow, he's got Hollywood good looks.
Yeah.
I've been married to my wife since 2008. We started dating in 2005, that's 20 years ago. Not once in 20 years has my wife ever said, I have Hollywood good looks. Okay? Not once. Not once has my wife ever said, this guy. So thank God he wasn't around when my wife was single. But that's a no-nonsense guy, isn't it? He's in his late 30s, very experienced. He's the kind of guy you want on your side in a war. Okay? He's also very cool under pressure. Right? Grace under pressure, isn't that the term? This is John Beveridge, who later becomes governor of Illinois. He is the commander of the 8th Illinois Cavalry. 8th Illinois, very experienced. Buford has 100% trust and faith in the 8th Illinois. The 8th Illinois Cavalry is founded right outside of Chicago by a guy named Farnsworth, whose nephew happens to be a one-star general. Ron Farnsworth, who will die at Gettysburg. In order to be in the 8th Illinois Cavalry, you had to be, or at least a belief in abolitionists. Okay? Farnsworth was an abolitionist. He was a representative in Congress. He was very well known. He knew Lincoln very well. He was also a very wealthy man. He helped organize the 8th Illinois, and they trained in a place called Kane County, Illinois, if you're familiar with Illinois, which is an area right outside of Chicago on the Fox River. The 8th Illinois is a very, very experienced cavalry regiment. Their commander is an Irishman. He's born and raised in Ireland. As a matter of fact, he was in the British Army briefly as a young man. He is an engineer by training and profession. He comes to the United States, finds his way to Chicago, go west, young man. Back then, that meant either San Francisco in the mining, right, or to Chicago. And he ends up in Chicago, just north of Chicago, a town called Evanston, and his house still stands today. The Department of Anthropology at Northwestern, that is the building that they have, that's his old house, okay? He's a very good commander, and he's kind of had a tragedy. He drowns off the coast of Nicaragua in 1866. After the war, he took a tour, kind of this, the war's over, I want to see the world kind of thing, and he drowns. But a lot of the letters we have, there's a guy named Hazelton who wrote a lot about the 8th Illinois. They had a lot of faith in gambling. He had a thick Irish brogue. They always knew he was upset because the brogue, they couldn't hear him. They couldn't understand what he was saying. He'd get upset, he'd start his Irish brogue and get in the way of it. But they don't know if he's arguing with them or yelling at him or saying something, probably speaking Gaelic to him, I don't know. Okay. These are two very experienced commanders. John Beveridge, he will actually be at her house, which is that ridge, her ridge, and he'll be at that hotel right there commanding the 8th Illinois in the morning of July 1st. So, I'll give you some statistics here real quick. What we're looking at from Illinois, over 90,000 soldiers are in the Army of the Potomac. We have 1,000 of them. That's it. Okay? About a little more than 1% are from Illinois, and yet they play a tremendously significant role, starting with John Buford. Okay? Starting with John Buford, who's considered Illinois. So we have over 1,000, 9 will be killed in combat, 34 will be wounded, 96 will become POWs. Most of them end up in Andersonville. The 8th Illinois, again from St. Charles, which is called Kane County, they are definitely the abolitionist regiment. Their strength 470, okay, led by Beveridge. The 12th Illinois is from the south suburbs all the way up to central Illinois, and they're led by an Indiana Colonel George Chapman of the 3rd Indiana. I have a friend of mine who wrote the book on the 12th Illinois, and he passed away a few years ago, wrote a great book on the 12th Illinois. The 82nd Illinois is a really fascinating group of soldiers. They're all volunteers. Most of them are German. There are some Scandinavians. There's a whole company that is completely Jewish, okay? And again, most of them are from Germany. And the 82nd Illinois is recruited all from Chicago. They will have only 318 at Gettysburg. They lost half their numbers in the 11th Corps. And if you know anything about Chancellorsville, what happens to the 11th Corps at Chancellorsville? They get the living heck kicked out. They lost half their strength at Chancellorsville. They lost their commanding officer, Heckler. So Edward Solomon will take his place as lieutenant colonel, and he rises to the occasion. He later becomes governor of Washington, and he's an attorney. He passes away in San Francisco, and he's buried in California today. Edward Solomon is, right? He was appointed by President Grant to the Washington Territory. So real quickly, just a little bit more about the 82nd Illinois. We'll get to them in a little while. Again, one of the things that, most of them spoke German to each other, even though many of them knew English quite well. But the one thing that you find is this really fascinating German term or concept called Gemeinschaft or Gemeinschaft. And that loosely translates to English meaning community, okay? These are not volunteers thrown together in a regiment. They train together and they go off and fight together. These are people who grew up together or lived together in various parts of Chicago, and then they come together and fight together, okay? And so this term, Gemeinschaft, is a very significant concept to understand about the 82nd Illinois. Because most of them are German 48ers. And they didn't win the revolution of 1848. They lost. And when you lose, what do? You leave. You leave, or you get in prison, or you get killed. Get executed. Make a choice. The revolution failed. At least from their perspective. You know what your rights are when someone takes them away, don't you? They came to the United States. And these guys hated slavery. They talked about it all the time. They were Lincoln men. They called themselves the Lincoln men. They believed in Lincoln. Because why? They were fighting for rights that they didn't have in 1848. There are things worth fighting for, aren't there? And when they came to the United States, they had these rights, especially as white men of European descent. Isn't that true? So you know your rights are when someone takes them away where you've never had them. That's them. That's them. We know that. It's in the historical record. They talked about it all the time. Janet mentioned that we were founded in Chicago Round Table was founded in 1940, December 3rd, by the way, was the first round table. We had 3 Civil War veterans still alive at the time. Think they could tell some stories? Especially if we gave them a little Guinness on the side. Chicago. By the way, Carl Sandburg was a member of my round table. I bet you know how about that. Huh? Pretty cool. Pretty cool. So again, Company C was predominantly Jewish, and they're also known as German 48ers. Okay? On the left is their Corps Commander, Oliver Howard from Maine. We believe that Howard, historical record, a lot of historians like myself, we believe Howard did a very good job at Gettysburg. Okay? Chancellorsville, he made some mistakes, no doubt about it. And when a commander makes a mistake in the field, people pay with their lives. Just that simple. Okay? Of course, Carl Schwarz, very fascinating guy, comes to the United States and in Wisconsin, becomes known to Lincoln. By the way, his wife is a teacher. And when did she start in Parkside, Wisconsin? The first kindergarten. Kinder means child, right? His wife started kindergarten in the United States. She brought kindergarten to the United States. For some reason, when I tell this to my students in my summer class, they love, oh wow, you know. You know, it's a fascinating, isn't that fascinating? Kindergarten, he is a very forward-thinking person. There's a beautiful high school in Chicago named Schwarz. Right? Beautiful structure, beautiful high school. But Schwarz, I think, you know, obviously we have biographies of him and things like that. Very fascinating guy, very intellectual guy. But he's willing to do what? He's willing to risk his life for what he believes in. Okay? Why? Because he's a German 48er. You know your rights are when someone takes them away, or you don't have them. Okay? He's a German 48er. And I don't know if Howard, who was a very forward-thinking guy himself in some ways, obviously Howard University is named after him, he is an abolitionist, he was seriously wounded in the Civil War, he later goes out west after the Civil War. But I think the way race and ethnic feelings were and thoughts were at the time, thank God we've evolved, right? Sorry, it's a joke. But Howard probably is someone who thinks about German Americans, probably the most enlightened of many in the high command. Okay? And there he is. That's one of my personal heroes right here. This is Edward Solomon. He has the great distinction of being the Chicago alderman. Right? Now, what you folks might call corruption in California, we just call it doing business in Chicago. What might get a politician arrested for in Illinois, we just blush, you know? So, and the only people who understand that joke are people from New Jersey, like, yeah. You know, guy's nephew gets a job running a company that gets $1 million contract from local government, hey, you know. Guy had to fill pots, you know, pull potholes in the road, right? Yeah, this guy really is a fascinating man. He actually leaves, he is credited, he knows a guy. You know you're from Chicago if you know a guy. He gets a leave in March of 1863 to come back to Chicago, and what does he do in Chicago? He votes in city council on something that was important to him. He literally took leave of absence in March of 1863 to come back and vote. He was an active alderman. But, and I joke at that, if you're from Chicago, anybody from Chicago, it's kind of an inside joke, I always make fun of aldermen, but what does it say about Edward Solomon? I held an office, I had political power, and I was what? Elected. I was elected by my peers, Gemeinschaft. My community elected me. You don't think he had pride in that? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. I was elected. People voted for me. I wasn't appointed. I wasn't put in that position by some aristocrat. Right? I was elected. Very fascinating guy. He is buried in Northern California. I'll say San Francisco. And also got a dapper mustache. I always like that. So here we go. July 1st, early morning. Buford, with his 2,700 troops, of his hard-charging troops, the 8th and 12th Illinois Cavalry, he posts them west of Gettysburg, 3 miles. Buford has a sixth sense for battle. He knows they're coming, and we're not going anywhere. He knows they're coming. He knows them in his heart and soul. And who does he send to stop them and oppose them? The 8th and 12th Illinois. Okay? He's got Indiana guys. He's got New York guys. Okay? He's got West Virginia guys. He sends the Illinois guys. Okay? Why? Because he trusted them. Not that he didn't trust the other regiments, certainly. I'm not saying that. So they're out 2 to 3 miles west. They're forming what's called a vendetta, right? That's a mounted mounted trooper, either at a post and kind of like a listening post today in the military. All right, they're out there waiting to find the enemy. All right. So July 1st, about 7:30 in the morning, Lieutenant Marcellus Jones, who was from Vermont, but he lived in a suburb of Chicago, he fires the first shot. Okay? He's also buried in Wheaton, Illinois. He's born in 1830, dies in 1900. Lieutenant Jones says to Sergeant Schaefer, his best friend, his friend for life. Schaefer was a carpenter. Marcellus Jones later became a sheriff of DuPage County, and was kind of a politician in some ways. He wasn't trying to necessarily hit a officer in the Confederate Army. That's would have been a bonus. That shot alerted everyone that they see Confederates coming down Chambersburg Park, which is Route 30 today, Lincoln Highway. Okay? How many people in here have been to Gettysburg, by the way? Okay, most of you. Okay. So it's a warning shot to alert others that they're coming. Okay? That one shot, Eric Wittenberg said this many times. That one shot gave them 2 hours. Right? They can give up ground for time now. Okay? They can give up space for time. Now they have a very good rifle, Sharp's rifle. Okay? Carbine, I'm sorry. Right? Breech loader, pop it in. Right? Send it down range. So it's not a effective firearm at long distance, but it's enough to keep them suppressed. Suppression fire. So it works. They're giving up ground for time. This has been since rehabilitated. This is the Wessler House. This is where the first shot marker is. This was put there by the 8th Illinois Cav in 1886. Okay? Marcellus Jones was there, so were a lot of his other friends. None of this trees or brush was there, but that marker was put there. This is the house, the original house. It's now been rehabilitated by the National Park Service. But I always like this picture. And of course, there's Chambersburg Pike. And anybody been to this location, the first shot marker? When you go there, they have a parking lot now. The National Park Service owns this property. But it used to have to cross the street, so it was like Indy 500 over there. And I mean, so there is some battle damage still in the house from what the park rangers tell us. And of course, there's the first shot marker. This is actually limestone that was mined in DuPage County. And again, this was dedicated in 1886. That's my little alarm, so it's telling me where I'm at. Okay. I still have 2 more hours. Hey, nobody, lock the door, Janet. Nobody go in.
You're gonna be alone.
What's that?
You're gonna be alone.
Yeah, I'll be alone. Yeah, I'll be the first time I spoke alone. So, there's that guy, Marcellus Jones, here on our left, of course, and that's his headstone. And this is in Wheaton, Illinois. It was actually neglected for a while, unfortunately, and we came in and put a new headstone in there. Very tragic story about Marcellus Jones. I'll tell it real quick. His wife, his first wife, they had a baby, a child, in the late 1850s, and in delivery, like a lot happened back then, his wife passed away. She bled to death. So he goes to war with a child, his son, right? He's a 3-year guy, and he later rehitched, so he stayed the whole time of the war. He signs up in 1861, and he stayed the whole war, okay? And his girlfriend, who was a math professor at Wheaton, probably one of the few women who was a math professor at that time, he married her in 1864, okay? He goes off to fight the war, and he's got an infant son whose wife and mother passed away, giving birth to his child. 1866, a year after the war, that son dies. Tragic. Tragic. He lives to 1900. He had another daughter in the late 1860s with his second wife. She will pass away at age 26, and his wife will pass away a few years before he does. So, and kind of indicative of people of that time. But when you read his historical records, which we have, Marcellus Jones, he was very much involved in a lot of different veterans groups of his time, okay? The GARs especially. So we owe him a great deal. This trooper, amongst many others, we in this room owe a lot to. Right? What they did to preserve this country at its worst time during the Civil War. And again, it's up to us as roundtables to keep that message alive, isn't that true? Okay, we move on. There's Schaefer. Always loved this guy. He lives till about 1920, and he was a carpenter. He lived a long time. Yeah. He came back to Gettysburg many times, and they were very good friends, Marcellus Jones and him. So what do we have going on here on July 1st? Morning of July 1st, we have Lieutenant General A.P. Hill. He's advancing from Cashtown, okay, and of course Longstreet's behind him. And then we have Ewell up in Harrisburg, okay? So Lee is desperately trying to concentrate his forces, and he picks where the firing is coming from because he has to, because this guy, Henry Heath, is told to do what? Not bring about a general engagement. What does Henry Heath do? He brings about a general engagement called the Battle of Gettysburg, right? I guess message sent, message not received. Kind of like my students when I had a test. So he's only 37 years old, same age as Buford, okay? He's a very close friend to General Lee. He's cousins to Pickett. And of course, he finished last in his West Point class. And we know how that works out for a few other West Point grads who finished last, right? Henry Heath, he was always a good time on a Saturday night. Okay, Henry Heath, he liked his Saturday night libations, if you will, and so he was always he's a very spontaneous guy. Didn't always think things through, but he was very aggressive. Okay, he was very, very aggressive throughout the war. He was very aggressive. He was a very aggressive commander, if not reckless at times. Who knew that, by the way? Who served with him? Buford knew that, yes. Okay? He knew he would come at it. Or at least he suspected it. Now, this is great. This is I found this at the Adams County Historical Society. This is the actual bridge that the Confederates will cross. So here we have a tactical map here of Heath coming down in red and Buford in blue, Gettysburg, west of Gettysburg, Chambersburg Pike. So 8th and 12th Illinois, it's a defense in depth. Kind of what you see in Europe during the Cold War, okay? This defense in depth. By 8 o'clock in the morning, we have our first KIA. That's a Illinoisan in the 12th Illinois, a young guy. He had just turned 21. He was a farmer from a small town outside of Kankakee, Illinois, which is south of Chicago. And that is Private Ferdinand Unser. Okay? He is killed. He is actually hit with shrapnel in the head. We also have, as I mentioned, General Ewell coming down from Harrisburg. And what happens? There's General Reynolds, one of the great generals of the Army of Potomac, a Pennsylvanian, right? Remember, Pennsylvania is free soil. This is free land. How dare we bring that army into our state, a free state? By the way, over 200 African Americans are going to be what in Pennsylvania? They're going to be captured. These are free people. And what does he do to them? He sends them south. He didn't care who they were. As long as you're black, you're going, they enslaved them. Okay? So, Reynolds and others are, even into their late life, they'd have these reunions at Gettysburg and all this kind of thing, and those Union veterans, to the day they died, they had conditions about reunions and all this kind of thing. Very interesting group. It's some great research have been published on this topic. Okay? War, remembrance, all those kind of topics. Some of them are controversial, sure. But Reynolds is killed, one of the best generals in the Army of Potomac. Buford still has his troops deployed. He's a 1-star, right? Reynolds is a 2-star, major general. And here we have, in 1868, Dr. Abner Hard, who is the doctor for the 8th Illinois. He establishes the first aid station at the railroad station. Okay? So you got Illinois entering Gettysburg the first to do that. You have the first shot fired by an Illinoisan. Unfortunately, the first KIA, an Illinoisan. And the first aid station set up by Dr. Abner Hard at the train station by an Illinoisan. And there it is. That's a modern picture, obviously. That's where Lincoln comes in November of 1863 as well. So, real quickly, this is an outline of what's happening here. West of town, the Confederates start to mass. They start to turn the tide, right? The First Corps fighting very, very well, but losing ground. Okay? Confederates are fighting very well, and they're pushing the First Corps out of that area west of town. They're starting to gain a tremendous advantage over the First Corps, where the rebels are. Buford sees this. Okay? Buford is someone who is not going to stop an order that's going to cause people to die. Okay? What does he do? Eric Whittenburg talks about this. He, the great cavalry historian, he lines up the 8th Illinois along that road. And he gives them the order to charge their flank. Does cavalry do well charging infantry? No. Not at all. It's a disastrous move. Buford knows that. But he's got to slow down the rebel advance. What is his job? He's got to buy time for ground. Well, he already gave up all the ground he could give up. Now it's the only thing he can give up. His men. And is he going to do it? Yes. Yes, he is. He's going to give that order. He did give that order. What happened was, these are Lane's, this is Lane's regiment from North Carolina. And to his credit, what does he do? He forms a Napoleon box. We haven't seen that since Waterloo. He orders a Napoleon. Well, why? It's a box, bayonets facing outward. Horses don't like that. Okay? They do not like that. And what it does, it's almost something out of a movie. Okay? Right when he's about to give the order to attack, right? The trumpets are blaring, they're lining up, the 8th Illinois Cavalry is lining up for this charge, and they know this probably could result in my death. Okay? Cavalry is supposed to fight cavalry, or at least dismounted, fight infantry. Okay? Not mounted. And what happens? He gets the order to do what? By General Doubleday, to retreat. So he reverses that order, sends an order to retreat, and they retreat, 8th Illinois, 12th Illinois, they retreat through town, and they end up near the peach orchard for that night. Okay? The next morning, July 2nd, their commanding officer, Pleasanton, orders them back to Maryland, Westminster. They're almost out of ammunition, their horses are exhausted, they're exhausted, they've been on the run, or on the horse, since June 3rd. And so they're sent back to Westminster in Carroll County to rearm and resupply. What's the problem with that? What's the problem? Alfred Pleasonton doesn't do what? Doesn't send anybody as a replacement. There's a guy in the 3rd Corps, maybe you remember his name, he commands the 3rd Corps, a guy by the name of Sickles. Where's my screen? Where's my forward observers? Where's my cavalry? Oh, they left. Okay. So what does he do? He moves forward. And how'd that work out? Right? So General Sickles now without a scouting formation in his position. Okay, a few more minutes, everyone. So here's the map. We've got a tactical map. Okay, it's not a strategic map. And again, here we have the 1st Corps retreat. All right, 82nd Illinois. Let's move on to them real quick here. The first day they're ordered through town and into the north of town. Okay, near Barlow's Knoll. Anybody been to Barlow's Knoll here? Tough place to be, right? You got Oak Hill to your left. Okay, facing this way as a Union soldier. Federal soldier, you got Oak Hill to your left, and you got Barlow's Nose to your right, and you're caught in a crossfire. You're in the middle of nowhere. Okay, it's a horrible position to be in, yet they're ordered to protect Herbert Dilger's battery. And Herbert Dilger, who is a Medal of Honor recipient for his actions at Chancellorsville. Guy's brilliant. He later actually becomes the overall commander of the Illinois National Guard after the war. Okay, and he's got a grandson who fought on the German side in World War II, and he's got another grandson who fought on the American side of World War II. So, interesting, huh? So Dilger's an interesting guy. He actually lives out the rest of his life in Cincinnati. So Ewell is coming down from Harrisburg. They're sent out to defend Dilger's battery. And Dilger's just hammering away at Oak Hill. Okay? He's a brilliant artillery officer. Really is. So here we are real quick. There's Barlow, our 82nd Illinois. It's going to be right here. Oak Hill's over here. So facing this way, here is Harrisburg up here. Okay, so here comes Ewell down here, and here comes the Confederates west of town. I always love this picture. This is the Ames House. This is Harrisburg Road. So they would have been a little bit north there. The Barlow's Knoll would have been right about there, about a quarter mile from this position. But I like that. It's kind of a period piece, kind of showing you what that area looked like. And again, they're caught in crossfire. Barlow, who founds the American Bar Association, right? Severely wounded, he survives, goes on to command the Overland Campaign in 1864. He's not very friendly towards, he's a New Yorker, he's not very friendly towards German American soldiers. And of course, that position becomes overrun by the Confederacy north of town on July 1st. There is Dilger's battery, that's Oak Hill. Okay. And there's our 82nd Illinois boys, okay. Here would be Barlow's Knoll, here would be Oak Hill, and here would be Harrisburg, and this is where Ewell's coming down and just hammering that position. They are caught in a crossfire they cannot get out of, and there's nothing they can do, okay. Zero. There's nothing they can do. Here's the retreat through town. Now, Howard takes over command of July 1st when Reynolds is killed. And to his credit, Howard has a fallback position, and that's Cemetery Hill. And thank God he did. He put about 1,600 troops on there with a battery. Thankfully, he did do that. This is the Eagle Hotel, a Swiss immigrant by the name of Emil Frey. He is a captain. He is captured here. About 89, 82nd Illinois Regiment soldiers are captured at the Eagle Hotel. In the retreat, the confusion of the retreat, they go into this hotel, right? They know that the hotel because Buford stayed there on June 30th. And what do? They start smashing out those windows and they're going to hold a position. What do the rebels tell those that are inside that house? We're going to burn you out. Either surrender or we're going to burn you out. There are many members of the 82nd Illinois who will die at Andersonville as enlisted soldiers. There he is. He later became president of Switzerland. There's Emil Frey right there. So, quite a famous guy.
Wow.
Quite a famous guy. That sword, too, is at the Chicago Museum, too. So real quickly here, So the 82nd Illinois reforms at Cemetery Hill. On the morning of July 2nd, they get the audacious order to do what? Find volunteers, and you're going house to house fighting. The only time we see house to house fighting before this was at Fredericksburg, okay? They're looking for 50 volunteers, and who are they looking those volunteers from? The 82nd Illinois. Right? Everyone is a go-getter until they come looking for you to be that go-getter. Then maybe not so much a go-getter, right? He finds 50 volunteers, led by this guy who later became an incredibly wealthy person in Peoria, Illinois. That's Joseph Greenhut, who actually marries the niece of Edward Sullivan. As we say in Chicago, he knew somebody. How'd you meet your wife? I know a guy. Famous guy, an alderman. That's his niece. Okay, good enough. We understand. Must have been love at first sight. Okay? So they go house to house fighting. They clear out those sharpshooters who are picking off people on Stevens Knoll. You've been to Gettysburg, Stevens Knoll, right? Yeah. Right. Artillery was on Stevens Knoll. Guy had the greatest name at Gettysburg. His first name was Greenleaf. Greenleaf Stevens. What a name. Yeah. So the 82nd Illinois goes house to house fighting after losing a lot of its strength. Okay? Later, on the night of July 2nd, they are sent to, from East Cemetery Hill, which is a lot of fighting on July 2nd, if you recall. They're sent as reinforcements over to Culp's Hill for General Greene. And they will fight on the night of July 2nd, and then on the morning of July, throughout the day of July 3rd. Horrible fighting at Culp's Hill. So look what the 82nd Illinois did. They got caught north of town the first day. They retreat to Cemetery Hill. 89 of them are captured in that retreat, by the way. Then in the morning of July 2nd, they're asked or ordered to volunteer, 50 men, to go and clear out houses because there's rebel sharpshooters in there. And then, on the night of July 2nd, they're sent over to heavy fighting on Culp's Hill as reinforcements. I don't know. It's a lot of duty. It's a lot of ask. This is the Wagon Hotel. This is the area. This is mostly Pennsylvania boys that were defending this position. But this is basically the area. Today there's a huge hotel there today. There's a convenience store here today. Modern America, right? And there he is. There's Joseph Greenhut. He survives the war, became a very wealthy liquor distributor from Peoria, Illinois. He's also a Jewish member of the 82nd Illinois. This is John Angerman. He is a young man. He's kind of the guy they wanted to protect. He was kind of an outgoing, fun-loving guy, probably all of 2021 at the time. And he always would volunteer. Well, he didn't volunteer. They go and then house-to-house fighting. He had a premonition he was going to die that day. And what did he tell Greene, his officer in command? I'm not going to volunteer. And they said, what's wrong? Are you injured? Is something wrong? He says, no, I just don't want to go on this mission of clearing these houses. So what does he do? He gets behind that stone wall that you can see there today at Gettysburg. He's hunkered under, and what do you think happens to him? A shell burst above his head. A fragment comes, takes off the back of his head, killed him. Yeah, he's buried at Gettysburg today. And it was devastating to the men because he was the one guy that wanted to, you know, he was that one guy, you know, he was a symbol of being young and voracious and outgoing and fun-loving, and he doesn't make it. So here we are, 82nd Illinois on Culp's Hill. General Greene orders them into the breach, and they go in where the New York 149th is. Real quickly, I'm right out of time. General Greene says, these regiments render good service, meaning the 82nd Illinois. By the way, the 82nd Illinois is on the monument at Culp's Hill to Greene. Have you all seen Greene's monument there? General Greene, the beautiful monument at Culp's Hill? Yeah, the 82nd Illinois, you know, they're not even in the 12th Corps, obviously. They love the Corps, and yet they are specifically mentioned, 82nd Illinois, on the General Greene monument at Gettysburg. And Greene says, you know, these regiments, 82nd Illinois, they rendered good service being sent into the trenches to relieve our regiments as their ammunition was exhausted. An unidentified officer we think was Rufus Dawes of the 6th Wisconsin, right? He says, if you've been here yesterday instead of that damn 11th Corps, right? All those German soldiers, we would not have been driven back. And he says that to the wrong guy. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Solomon, the commander of the 82nd Illinois, that's in the 11th Corps. And what did he say? "You are a miserable hound, sir." I'm using that someday. I'm going to use that line. I and my regiment belong to the same 11th Corps you are speaking of, and we did no worse fighting yesterday. I love it. You miserable hound. I don't know what that means in 2025, but it doesn't sound very good in 1863. And this is a soldier's artistic interpretation of where the area they were fighting on Colts Hill. You got the breastworks here and all that kind of thing. All right, real quick here. I said that, what, for the 5th time now? Here's Colts Hill. Here's the defense. This would have been the area that the 82nd Illinois. Here's 149th New York right there. That's a beautiful monument to those guys, by the way. And of course, here's Allegheny Johnson and his boys coming up to take on Greene, General Greene, and mostly the 12th Corps at Colts Hill. And I had to show this. There's the Greene Monument, and there it's our 82nd Illinois guys. I always loved Greene, just kind of, you know, he's a guy, what, he was born in 1801, he dies in 1899. What a, you know, what a story. His grandfather was in Revolutionary War, right, famous general. So, and what does he do? He's an engineer, built breastworks. We're going to hold this, you know, he had, what, a little more than, what, 1,500 troops under him at the time? Real quickly, almost done here. On September 3rd, 1891, all 3 monuments of all 3 regiments are dedicated at Gettysburg. The 8th Illinois Cavalry Major John Beveridge, when he became governor of Illinois, he attended the Illinois Monument dedication and spoke these words: "The Gettysburg battle is fought. The victory is won. The nation lives. Here on Gettysburg Field, the wave of the rebellion." Right? The wave of the rebellion. They stopped it. Men like him stopped it. Right? He saw his buddies get killed. He gave orders that got people killed. Imagine living with that. But there are things worth fighting for. A clump of trees, now fenced in by an iron fence railing, marks the spot where Armistead fell, and Cushing, disemboweled, fired his last shot, and where the last wave dashed against the ridges and rocks, broke, and receded nevermore to rise. The high water mark, right? We stopped them right here. And of course, what's right near there? An African American's farm, right? Yeah. Right there. So there's a lot of symbolism if you look for it. There's a beautiful 8th Illinois Cavalry monument that Janet had put on your Facebook and webpage. Beautiful monument. I took this in the early summer a few years ago. Here's our 12th Illinois guys. Right, I love this monument, beautiful monument. On the back they have a list of their dead. And the 82nd Illinois caught in that open field there. Now today there's a soccer field behind it, but just completely wide open. Here's the National Cemetery. We have 6 Illinois boys there, buried there, all killed during the first 3 days of fighting. And I started with Lincoln, I'm going to finish with Lincoln. I got through it. I love this quote. It's a very much an American quote. "A government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." Illinois played a role in that. Thank you for having me as your guest speaker tonight. Thank you. I usually had a Guinness, but I don't know what you guys drink in California, so I don't know. So any questions?
Open for questions.
Yes, fire away.
I'm just always curious how Buford rose from a captain in 1861 to a brigadier general 2 years later, or less than 2 years later.
Yeah, actually his first post when the war started was as an administrative job in Washington, D.C., a ridiculous position for him. I think they didn't know what his loyalties were, because he was from Kentucky, although he obviously raised in Quad Cities, what we call the Quad Cities. And of course his dad was an Illinois politician, but anyways. He was a regular Army soldier, and I think it's because he had Kentucky roots. He had family members that were in the Confederate military during the war. Also, Buford wasn't someone who was going to politic for himself. He just wasn't going, even though he came from a political family, he wasn't going to go out there and write letters to his congressman and all this kind of, he wasn't going to do that. It wasn't his personality. But man, he showed how great a commander he was during the war. It was a tremendous loss for this country and also for the United States Army that he died in December of 1863. So at the ripe old age of 37. But I think it's because he had Confederate, or I'm sorry, that's what I'm going to say. I think because he had Southern roots in Kentucky.
But he just jumped almost immediately then from captain?
That wasn't very uncommon though. I mean, look at George Custer, right? Look at Elon Farnsworth, whose uncle is a very famous representative in Congress. As a matter of fact, he started with Illinois. I think that could be it. Plus, he didn't politic for himself. It just wasn't his personality. In other words, what do we call it today? Networking, right? We got a network, all that social network, we got a network. Hey, how you doing, right? That's not Buford. He was old school before there was the term old school. And they stuck him in. I mean, he could have been trained. He could have done a million. And what do? They stick him in an administrative role in Washington D.C. Just whoever made that decision. Wow. But again, you have to figure out who's who. Who's going to come out and be the best. Yeah.
Well, the rest of the Illinois regiments ended up in the Western Theater, so why did the 82nd get sent to the Army of the Potomac?
Because they were German. And that's the answer. They were German. They were German immigrants. There were a lot of German regiments in the Army of Potomac. I think that Lincoln, they were also very loyal to Lincoln. They were very loyal to the Union cause, and a lot of them were abolitionists. A lot of them were German 48ers. Who else is a German 48er, by the way? A guy named Karl Marx. You ever hear of him? Right? German 48er too, okay? Marxism, right? So I think, I shouldn't say think, as a historian, I know, because they were German. And they also suffered the consequences of that too, because they actually got transferred to Sherman, and they actually were in the marches to sea under Sherman. They got transferred out of the Army of Potomac, through no fault of their own, by the way. And they were not happy about that either. There was a lot of discrimination against German soldiers in the Civil War. Especially those that stood out, like they did. Yes, far away. Wagner.
He's a 48er.
Yes. A lot of, there's some great research on German 48ers too, by the way. Some really, really good research on German 48ers. That's a good question though. Yeah, so they were German. Why were they sent out west? They were German. That's that simple. The 8th Illinois, because they were abolitionists, okay? And the 12th Illinois were really more reserved for the 8th Illinois. So, very cool. Yeah, far away.
Totally unrelated. Why did it end up being 7 Civil War generals from Galena, Illinois?
Yes, that's a great question. Galena, have you been to Galena, Illinois, by the way? Yeah, Galena is a beautiful town. It's about the only place in Illinois that looks a little bit like California. That's been a great debate. Rawlings, which is Grant's right-hand man. Galena was a place of great wealth. It attracted ambitious young people to Galena. Galena was a lead mining town, so a lot of engineers, a lot of people who own businesses. Also, it's on the Mississippi River, so you have that as well. It's also heavy agriculture, especially in Iowa. So it's a beautiful area. It's a lot of rolling hills in that area. So it really attracted a lot of young, ambitious people to Galena, Illinois. As a matter of fact, it's always kind of surprising that Galena kind of didn't grow like maybe like St. Louis did, because if you even go there today, you can see a lot of the homes have been preserved, and they're very beautiful homes. You can see the kind of wealth that was there in that part of the area. As a matter of fact, Grant's father opened up a store in Galena, and that's where Grant worked before the war, as many of you already know. That's about the best answer I have for you. It was really a place for young, ambitious people. So, yeah. Most of them were lawyers, too. Yeah, far away.
Okay, I must say I don't know much about Illinois and all this.
I don't either, so I made all this up, by the way.
So
Don't anybody fact check me, by the way.
I think up with something that seems like, certainly you have a passion for this, and it seems like Illinois, people from Illinois have a passion for land and Lincoln and all that, and being from California was like, okay, the North fought the South, right?
Yeah.
Am I correct on anything? But like places like Massachusetts and New York, that their passion wasn't the passion that Pennsylvania or Illinois or Ohio had.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, those are Northeasterners. They're old Yankees, old school Yankees, yeah, for the most part. As a matter of fact, in Illinois and Chicago, you see a lot of East Coast names. Troy, you know, things like that. A lot of Irish names now. I'm Irish, but of Irish descent. But you're asking, most of those New York East Coast Yankees, for lack of a better term, I know it's a broad statement, they were proud of that term. A lot of them traced their family history to the Revolutionary War, right? You know, the Constitution, all that kind of thing. So he's asking a question about New York, or actually East Coast folks, as a different motivation of fighting for the Union Army than those from Chicago or the upper Midwest. And that's a very true statement. Why? Because those in Chicago in 1860 are Irish and they're German, or they're ambitious people, okay? So, like McCormick, maybe ever hear McCormick, right? McCormick Place? Yeah,
Cyrus.
McCormick. Cyrus McCormick, yeah, the cotton gin. Or I'm sorry, not the cotton gin, the Reaper. Come on, Dennis, the Reaper. Good Lord, cotton gin. The Reaper, yeah, which is still used today. Those flaps, right? The Reaper, that's still used today, right? For corn and for beans and for wheat. So this guy invented that, and of course he's a Virginian. Sorry, McCormick. And where does he go to make his millions? Chicago. Matter of fact, he's at the confluence of the North River, Chicago River, to the south, right downtown Chicago, still there today, but of course his remnants aren't there. Matter of fact, there's a high school in a town west of Chicago called Plano, and they're called the Reapers because he had a big depot there on the trains, called the Reapers, yeah. My answer to why people fight is a great question. McPherson wrote that book, amongst others. Some mentioned McPherson earlier. My answer to that would be that they were old school Yankees in the Northeast, and they were Stoics. A lot of them come from an English background, and they had lived in those communities for generations, in Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, and Vermont, and New Hampshire, and Maine, and all this kind of thing, in Connecticut.
And wouldn't they be farther away from the war too? I mean, you know, the sort of slavery, I mean, you know, the
Well,
Mason-Dixon line type stuff. I mean,
yeah,
if
you have Maryland,
If
right
you're
there,
in
Delaware.
Vermont, I mean, it's like, you know, like.
Yeah, but don't forget, Vermont was the first state to actually have a document that outlawed slavery. They were the 14th state, and in their state constitution, it specifically outlawed slavery. So they, you know, that was in what, 1792, 93, somewhere in there. Yeah. I'm a historian, by the way, I get my dates all good, it's sacrilegious. But they actually are the first state to say there's no such thing as slavery in Vermont. Well, yeah, it's a free state. Well, they put it in writing. They're the first modern document, the Vermont state constitution, that outlaws slavery. So they're very proud of their history.
It's the immigrant factors. would be-
Very much so, yeah. And, you know, Irish immigrants, they're poor. And they come from a very oppressed country, Ireland. Ireland today is a very wealthy country. I used to talk to my grandparents, and I'd always say, why did you come to America? My grandfather came to Fontana. You know what he worked for? He worked for Kaiser. And what did he do for Kaiser? He made steel. He tried doing that for 30 years. And he did that starting in World War II, all the way to 1973. So, and that's where my dad grew up. So long story short is, you know, what did my grandfather say? I asked him when I was a kid, but I was about 12, and it's a stupid question, why did you come here? I didn't expect his answer. He said, well, I couldn't eat the scenery in Ireland. I'm like, what the heck does that mean? Grandpa had a few, he used to call it Irish soup, he called it Guinness. When I was a kid, I don't think he wanted me to know he was having a beer. Hey, Daddy, go get me some Irish soup. Oh, okay, shit, you know, I want soup, I can, I don't know, this is great. He goes, you can't have any of that. You can't eat the scenery, they were poor. What do you do when you're young and you're ambitious and you live in a country that doesn't respect even basic human rights? You leave. Do we see that today? Yeah, I mean, there's a whole debate about immigration, right? And that's a whole different debate, but with different situations. But they were poor. What were they afraid of with slavery? All these hardworking African Americans would come north to take their job. Well, if you're a middle class, well-educated German immigrant from 48, you're not concerned about slaves becoming free, moving north, competing for blue-collar jobs necessarily. Is that true? So it's a different motivation, but they still fought. And they fought with a lot of pride. I don't think a lot of Irish Americans in the Civil War said, hey, they're Lincoln Brigade. What do they say? We're the Irish Brigade. And we're fighting for this country's constitution. Who cares? They're fighting. Whether they're fighting for African-American freedom or not, they're still fighting for what they believe in. The ends justify the means. I mean, as an Irish American who's very proud of that, I would hope that a lot of them took that moral high road and suggest slavery is part of the equation. We did see that as they went south. Kind of like in World War II, American soldiers, what are we fighting for? This World War I was just fought, my uncle, my father, and all of a sudden they come to what? They go to the Dachau and they see what the Gestapo and the SS was doing. They actually saw physically what they, right? Think that doesn't change your mind? Dang right it does. Dang right it does. Once people take away your rights, or threaten to, you're going to fight for them. I don't care who you are. Yeah, far away.
I heard that
Yeah.
from General Pershing said
Blackjack Pershing, yeah.
said that there was a strong influence on World War I in American thinking about the war derived from the U.S. Civil War. Do you know anything about that?
Well, Pershing obviously did not want French or English military to have command over American troops. And he believed very much in the concept of the Civil War, where you had the Army of the Potomac, and you had the Army of the Cumberland, right? And so they had yes, they're part of the American Army, but they also had their own commands. And so they could act independently tactically, but follow general strategy. That's what Pershing said to the British and the French. We're not following, you're not going to lead any American troops. We'll follow the strategy, okay? Because why did Wilson throw and 100,000 Americans die in World War I? Very simple, because Russia, revolution, right? They won. They sued for peace with the Germans, and the Germans sent 1 million ground troops to the West. And what did Wilson have to say? The two democracies left standing in Western Europe are about to fall if we don't do something. France and England. Tried convincing the average American to go fight for England or France in 1917. Good luck. And he also campaigned in 1916 that he wasn't going to do that, right? I'm shocked to say that a politician lied. In Chicago, we expected, hey, you lied, okay. He got a job, so I can't understand that. I hope I answered your question. That's a great question. I like Blackjack Pershing. He's an interesting guy. He actually he outlived World War II. So that's a good question. Boy, I didn't anticipate that. That's good. Got me thinking of that, but that's the reason. That's the reason I did. Yeah, far away.
I just want to say your enthusiasm is tremendous. Thank you.
Oh!
Yeah.
Well, how do I put it? I love my life, and I love what I do. It's a privilege, and I mean it. I tell it to my students, and I mean it. It's a privilege for me to talk history to other people, whether they're my students, or you folks, or at Gettysburg, or wherever. And I really mean that's a privilege. My dad lived history, we all do. And one thing I would say, I also have a relative, my great-grandfather, if he dies in the Civil War, I'm not here. His name was Charles Bennett. He served the 11th New York Light Artillery. He was at Gettysburg. If he gets killed, I'm not here. Right? My mother's not here. Oh, she did pass a few years ago. So I think there's history everywhere. And I see it that way. Like when I came here, I was thinking about Native American history and who lived here and how did they live and how did they survive. And the guy who founded this house, he was a Chicago guy. What was he thinking? Wrong with it, but this is a Prairie style house. This is Chicago. This is, when Janet, I didn't know that, I did my own research, and here I am. And I really mean it's proud. I'm very proud to be here. I'm the president of Chicago Round Table. We pass the mantle, just like, and without our roundtables, who passes this history on? These are stories that we have to tell. We have to tell them. What we do matters. You should see my young students, 18 to 24 years, the age of social media and blah, 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 and those dang smartphones and everything else. But man, you get them turned on to history. Everyone loves history, even if they don't know. I hope you all like to talk. I was